And here you can see how the tyrant Khilji of the Delhi Sultanate sent his commander Malik Kafur to attack and loot the Ranganatha Swami temple, which killed over 13,000 people. However, this sacrifice of less than just 70 Devadasis led to Vilayamal, who stopped this massacre. And the army of the Sultanate looted gold from the temple. However, the army also wanted to seize the deity, the main deity, the Lord Ranganatha Swami, which they believed was made of pure Abrangi gold. The Vaishnavite Acharya, Pillai Lokacharya, decided to safeguard Lord Ranganatha Swami, Bhagavan Mahavishnu. He concealed himself and planned an escape along with the deity to Madurai. And similarly, it was planned that goddess Ranganayaki Mahalakshmi would be taken to another location by a separate group. And to protect Ranganatha Vilayamal gave the ultimate sacrifice. To protect Lord Ranganatha, Vilayamal gave the ultimate sacrifice, fearing that the forces would capture the Acharya and the deity. Vilay distracted the commander by performing a dance. She performed the dance for several hours, thus gaining time for the Acharya, Pillai Lokacharya, to escape with the deity of Lord Ranganatha, and her dance lasted for hours together. And to the commander touched her, something which a chaste Dasi of Lord Ranganatha could never tolerate, like this. Finally, she took the commander to the eastern Gopuram and pushed him down the Gopuram side, and the commander fell and died. After killing him, Vilayamal jumped off from the tower, chanting the name of Lord Ranganatha. Meanwhile, the enemy's army used mechanical devices to throw large amount of oil. 69 Devadasis doused themselves in oil, immolated themselves, and jumped down on the invading army, setting them afire. The ferocious sacrifice of these Hindu Devadasis mothers protected the temple and stopped the massacre of any more people. Neither laziness, tamas, nor huge violence or war was used. The most ferocious strategic yaga saved several thousand lives, and ultimately Lord Ranganatha was protected and was saved from the Delhi Sultanate. And hailing Vilay's sacrifice, the chief of the Vijayanagar forces, Kempana, who drove away the Sultanate forces, named the tower after her. So as you can see, this tower here is named after Vilayamal. And the Gopuram continues to be painted white in her memory, even to this day, even after 700 years after her sacrifice. And even today, on the Adi Amavasya day, every year, the Tithi homage is performed for those 13,000 Vaishnava Hindu warriors, priests, and Devadasis who were killed while protecting the temple from the invading Delhi Sultanate. And because of their sacrifice, we are able to still enjoy Ranganatha Swami in all his glory and receive the blessings of Ranganatha Swami. And during the colonial time, laws for Hindus were against Hindu women rights, and we will understand that a little bit more in detail now. Once the Hindu woman who could be ruling one of the biggest empires of the world, where 1/3 of the world's population lived, enacted several laws to destroy Hinduism and the Hindu woman by enacting anti-Hindu laws. The inheritance and succession related laws appointed daughters, laws to promote sexual slavery to feed their armies. And here are the laws: the Cantonment Act 1864, the Contagious Disease Act of 1868, and the Cantonment Act of 1895, and other laws were related to women's rights were enacted. And after this, they devised a propaganda to call Hinduism as an oppressive religion which exploited women. Despite these laws and and the colonial rule being the reason for the exploitation of women and the oppression of women. And the colonial laws for Hindus abolished women's rights that they had of inheritance. As part of reforms to deprive Hindu women of their rights of succession and inheritance, which they had been enjoying since more than 5,000 years. Before this, Hindu women could not only inherit property, they practically administered kingdoms, waged wars in the capacity of an appointed daughter, the Pautrika. And by 1861, this was made completely illegal in the colonial rule. In parallel, around 1880, the colonial rulers enacted laws giving rights to their own women in their homeland. And then they proclaimed that Hindu law was inherently anti-women and deprived them of their rights, despite the colonial rulers actually depriving the rights of Hindu women. The colonial era government used Hindus that were trained in Macaulay's English schools to create false narratives of atrocities that were used to put the blame on Hindus. These false narratives were systematically compiled, mixing unsubstantiated hearsay and exaggerated and one-sided statements to project untruths as truth. And this became a further justification to enact even more laws depriving rights of colonial citizens. And some of these were specifically aimed at Hindus and Hindu women. The picture on the right shows a book which explains how the dowry extortions that are observed in India today were actually started when women's traditional property rights were taken away by the colonial government through convoluted logic. They justified saying that the women were getting property rights violated as a natural reason. And here are atrocities committed by colonial rulers on women. The colonial era soldiers and commanders like Wheeler used to throw Hindu newborn babies in the air and shoot them in the air. They would rip them apart, rip apart the wombs of pregnant mothers, undress and rape Hindu women and daughters, and take metallic pliers and crush their nipples till they bled and they died of suffering. It is said it was done to instill fear so that no revolt could ever happen again. And this is such a barbaric and brutal attack on the women who in Hindu society were worshipped. And colonial laws were aimed at making women prostitutes. The colonial era government passed several legislation on institutionalizing sexual exploitation of colonial women at a mass scale. They cunningly used words such as disease act to hide the underlying intention. Few of the laws enacted to make women prostitutes and make their exploitation easier. And here's an example of such a law, the Cantonment Act of 1864 and of 1895, and the Contagious Disease Act of 1868. And here, pictured above, is a news article which covers the plight of women who had to escape Calcutta because of the CDA, the act in rule. enacted by the British rule. And laws were promoted, which promoted women trafficking and prostitution. Again, the Cantonment Act of 1896 and 1895, and the Disease Act of 1868 by the colonial government was severely criticized in Europe and by the church, mainly because of the increase of women trafficked in Europe. The prostitution industry, which the colonial government created, was now hungry for white flesh, which Europeans were not able to tolerate. If the colonial rule was really interested in women empowerment, they would have not made these laws. The colonial rulers promoted sexual exploitation of women, and they branded this as women empowerment. The colonial rulers, invaders, hated Devadasis and Rudrakanyanas, who were celibate female monks, brahmacharis, who administered the temple rituals, arts, and festivals. They had spread rumors against Devadasis, calling them sex workers, and made several legislations to ban the spiritual tradition. With this, they destroyed the Rudrakanya tradition, claiming it was anti-women empowerment and projecting them as prostitutes, and stopped women from doing the temple's worship and other